All right, let's dive into a case that's got everyone talking. The story of Brad Sigmon, a death row inmate in South Carolina. He's made a pretty unusual decision choosing a firing squad over, well, the more typical methods of execution. And we're going to really dig into this one, folks. We've got news reports, court documents, even some historical stuff about firing squads.
Yeah, it's a fascinating case, and it's not just about like one man's choice, right? It brings up this whole debate about the death penalty, how it happens in the U.S.
Definitely. And we're not just, talking theory here. This is a real person facing a very final consequence. And the method, the firing squad, man, it just adds this whole other dimension.
It does, kind of takes you back, doesn't it? I mean, this would be the first firing squad execution in the U.S. in 15 years. And get this, the first ever in South Carolina's modern history.
Yeah.
It's a sign of how messy things have become around capital punishment.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's back up a bit, make sure everyone's on the same page. Back in 2001, Brad Sigmon was convicted of a double murder, killed his ex-girlfriend's parents, David and Gladys Larke.
And it was brutal. He beat them to death with a baseball bat.
Yeah, a truly horrific crime. And to make matters worse, he also kidnapped his ex-girlfriend, Rebecca Armstrong, even shot her in the foot before she managed to escape. So it's important to acknowledge the devastation he caused.
Absolutely, the suffering.
Right. Now, fast forward to today, Sigmund's on death row, and he's given a choice. Lethal injection, electric chair, or firing squad. And what does he pick? The firing squad? I mean, it's not exactly the obvious choice.
Right. People are definitely surprised. But see, there's a lot going on behind the scenes with South Carolina's lethal injection protocol. Big problems. They can't get the drugs easily. The whole process is super secretive. And Sigmund's lawyers are arguing that it's, a violation of his rights to not know what they're going to use.
So there's this lack of transparency, this fear that things could go very wrong.
Exactly. Sigmon even said, and I'm quoting here, he does not wish to inflict that pain on his family, the witnesses, or the execution team. But given South Carolina's unnecessary and unconscionable secrecy, Brad is choosing as best he can. Powerful stuff.
It really makes you think, if they can't even be upfront about the drugs, how can they guarantee a humane execution?
That's the question a lot of people are asking.
No.
And it's part of why we're seeing this, comeback, resurgence of firing squads. 5 states allow it now. Idaho, Mississippi, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Utah. And Idaho's even considering making the firing squad their main method.
It's like we're going back in time, So help me out here. What's the logic behind this? Is it just because of the drug shortage, or is there something, more?
Well, it's definitely tied to the problems with lethal injection, but there's also this idea, maybe not accurate, but an idea that firing squads are faster, cleaner, less chance of things going horribly wrong,
Okay, less chance of a botched execution. But isn't there something just more, visceral about a firing squad?
Oh, for sure. It's hard to call being shot by a team of marksmen, humane.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the ethics come in. Does the method, how it looks, does that change whether the death penalty is just or not?
Heavy stuff. Okay, so you mentioned they have a specific protocol for firing squad executions in South Carolina. What actually goes down? Paint us a picture.
Well, it's very structured, almost clinical in how precise it is. The inmate is strapped to a chair, hood over their head, small target right over the heart, and then 3 corrections officers, they volunteer for this, by the way. They're hidden behind a curtain, and they all fire at the same time.
They have volunteers for this. Wow.
Yeah. And it's important to mention they use special bullets designed to, incapacitate quickly and minimize suffering. There's even a basin under the chair to catch the blood.
It's all so, methodical. It's hard to really grasp.
It is. But medical experts say, and the state claims, that it's a fast death, relatively painless. Dr. Jonathan Groner, is a clinical surgery professor, says the firing squad causes almost instant unconsciousness. Death comes soon after from blood loss. Basically, it's like a sudden cardiac arrest.
Okay, so it's over quickly. In theory, at least. But I can only imagine the psychological impact on everyone.
Oh, absolutely. And that's something we'll talk more about when we look at the ethical and legal side of things.
Please, of course. So we've set the stage, got the basics, but this is just the beginning, right? There's a lot more to this story.
A lot more. We need to understand Sigmon better, why he made this choice. We got to hear from the victim's family, too, dig into the history of firing squads, and really wrestle with the ethical and legal questions here.
So we've got this historical method making a comeback. We've got a convicted murderer choosing a pretty unique way to die, and a legal system trying to figure out, what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, there are so many moving pieces here, so many different perspectives, and yeah, it's tough to make sense of it all.
For sure. Okay, so let's dig into Brad Sigmon's motivations a little more. I mean, what led him to choose the firing squad? It doesn't seem like he's a simple guy, you know?
No, not at all. Our sources show he's a pretty complex individual. On the one hand, you've got the brutal nature of his crimes took 2 lives in a really horrific way. But then you've also got his statements of remorse, his apology to the jury, you know.
Yeah, it's hard to reconcile those two sides, you know?
It is, yeah.
And then we have to consider the legal context, right? South Carolina's lethal injection protocol, it's like this big secret.
Yeah, it's a huge problem.
Sigmon's lawyers, they hit a wall when they tried to get information about, like, the drugs being used, expiration dates, the whole thing.
And that lack of transparency, that's a key factor here. Sigmon said that he didn't want to put his family through it, or the witnesses or the execution team through the potential suffering of a botched injection. He felt like the firing squad was the least cruel option, considering everything.
Man, that's heavy. But I can see how, in his mind, that's how he got there.
Yeah.
It raises this question about the state's responsibility, right? If they're gonna do this, shouldn't they at least be more transparent about the whole thing?
Definitely. And this isn't just a South Carolina thing. You've got this nationwide shortage of lethal injection drugs. States are scrambling to find alternatives, and the pharmaceutical industry, they don't want to be involved in executions anymore. It's causing a lot of problems.
So this return of the firing squad, it's not just practical. It's a symptom of a bigger problem. The pharmaceutical industry is saying, nope, not going to be part of this anymore. It makes you think, should the availability of drugs even dictate how we carry out the death penalty?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question to consider, for sure. And it goes back to this big debate, the ethics of capital punishment.
Right. Strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah. In Sigmon's case, it's bringing all of that to the surface.
Definitely. There are people who believe, the death penalty, it's justified, it's a just punishment no matter how it happens. And then there are others, they're saying it's inherently cruel, doesn't matter how it's done, it's wrong.
Right. And it's not just a philosophical debate, right? There are these practical questions, too. Does it deter crime? Is it applied fairly? What about the risk of executing an innocent person? We've been wrestling with these questions for a long time.
Huge questions. And then, we have to remember the human cost of all of this. We're not just talking about abstract ideas here. There are real people at the center of this. Brad Sigmon, of course, but also the family of his victims,
Absolutely. David and Gladys Larke. Their loss was immense, and their family, they're still hurting. They were described as the glue that held their family together, pillars of the community. It's left a huge hole in so many lives.
Yeah. And then you have their daughter, Rebecca Armstrong, who is Sigmon's ex-girlfriend. She was a victim too, right? Kidnapped, shot by him before she escaped.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Her story adds this whole other level of complexity. She wants Sigmon to face consequences, but she doesn't believe in the death penalty. It just shows that even within the same family, you can have different ideas of what justice means.
Man, it's just awful all around. And it makes you think about closure. Can the death penalty really provide healing for the victims' families? Or does it just create more pain?
It's a tough question. There isn't a single answer that works for everyone. Some families, they find some comfort knowing that the person who hurt their loved one is gone, that they've been held accountable.
Yeah.
But for others, the idea of the state taking a life, it's morally wrong no matter what.
Right.
And it's important to respect those different views. There's no right answer, no one way to heal or find closure.
Absolutely. So we've got this historical execution method coming back, a murderer on death row, a legal system trying to figure out some tough questions, and a family grieving, trying to find their own sense of justice.
Yeah, a lot to take in. It's important to remember that there are no easy answers here.
Right.
But by exploring these issues, talking about them, we can at least try to understand the different sides. And maybe start to think about the bigger questions this case brings up. Justice, punishment, the value of human life.
And those are questions that are more relevant now than ever, right? As the debate rages on, as states try to find ways to carry out executions, and people like Brad Sigmon are making their final choices, we need to have these tough conversations. We got to look at our own beliefs about the death penalty and think about the consequences of the choices we make, both as individuals and as a society.
Couldn't agree more. And it's not about finding the perfect answer. It's about engaging with all the different viewpoints, the complexities, and acknowledging the human cost of every decision.
Well said. Okay, so we've talked about Brad Sigmon and why he chose the firing squad, the ethics of the death penalty, and what the victim's family is going through. But I think it's important to step back and look at the history of firing squads in the U.S., right? It's not a new thing, is it?
Not at all. Firing squads have been around for centuries, but they kind of fell out of favor in the U.S., like in the late 20th century when lethal injection became the go-to method.
Okay, so it was seen as more humane, right? More clinical, less violent.
Yeah, exactly.
But like we said, that perception, it's been challenged lately as states have all these problems with lethal injection, and now firing squads are back in the conversation. I find it fascinating, but also kind of unsettling, It's like history repeating itself.
It is. And it reminds us that the way we punish, it changes over time.
Right.
It reflects what we value, how we understand justice, how we feel about taking a life. It's all connected.
Right. So before South Carolina, were there any recent cases of firing squads being used in the U.S.?
Yeah, but it's been very rare. Since the death penalty came back in '76, only 3 people have been executed by firing squad. Now, that was all in Utah. The last one was Ronnie Lee Gardner back in 2010.
So why Utah? What's so different about how they handle capital punishment?
Well, Utah, they have a long history with firing squads. It was their main method of execution for decades, up until 2004 when they switched to lethal injection. But they kept the firing squad option, just in case, and some inmates, like Ronnie Lee Gardner, they specifically chose it.
It's strange, right, to think about making that choice. What could make someone prefer to die by a firing squad over the other methods?
It's a big question. I don't think there's just one answer, Some people, maybe they see it as a quick death, a dignified death even. Others might have religious or philosophical reasons for not wanting lethal injection.
Right. Or like with Brad Sigmon, it could be about not trusting the state to do it right. Like they're afraid of a botched lethal injection. It says a lot about what they're thinking, what they're afraid of.
Yeah, for sure. And it makes us, everyone watching this, everyone listening, think about our own beliefs about the death penalty.
Sure.
Is it ever the right thing to do? Can an execution ever be humane? Those are the big questions.
Those are the big ones.
And it brings us back to the heart of this whole deep dive. We're not just looking at the details of a crime or an execution. We're talking about life and death, about justice and mercy, what it means to be human.
And in Brad Sigmon's story, we see all these themes coming together in this really fascinating but also disturbing way.
Absolutely. He's not just a name on a piece of paper. He's a real person with a past, with a life, and his future is about to end in a way that most of us can't even imagine.
And his choice, the firing squad, as strange as it seems, it's made everyone talk about the death penalty. It's made us think about its history, the methods, even if it's right or wrong. And as we move forward with this deep dive, it's important to keep those big questions in mind. We're not just here to break down the facts of the case. We're here to explore the human side of it, the moral struggles, and what it all means for society.
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot more to uncover here.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. The specifics of Sigmon's case, the death penalty in general, the history, the ethics. But there's one piece of the puzzle we haven't really explored yet, and that's the victim's family. I mean, what has this whole ordeal been like for them?
Yeah. It's so easy to get caught up in all the legal stuff, the arguments, the methods. But we got to remember, there are real people who've been living with the fallout of Sigmon's actions for, over 20 years now?
Right.
David and Gladys Larke, they were, from everything we've read, the absolute heart of their family. Always there for their kids, their grandkids. So, their absence, it's just left this massive hole.
Yeah, it's hard to fathom the pain, the grief. It's got to be unimaginable. And our sources mention their daughter, Rebecca Armstrong, Sigmon's ex-girlfriend. She has a pretty unique perspective on everything.
Oh, yeah. Her story, it adds another layer to all this. I mean, she was a victim too, right? Kidnapped and shot by Sigmon before she got away.
So not only is she dealing with the loss of her parents, but she also has the trauma of her own encounter with him. Exactly.
And what's really striking is that, she wants Sigmon to be held accountable, but she said she doesn't support the death penalty.
Wow. That's got to be such a tough place to be, wanting justice for your parents, but not believing in that kind of punishment. It really shows how complicated this whole case is, the emotions involved.
Yeah, no doubt. There's no easy answer, no single definition of justice that fits, especially in situations like this.
It really makes you wonder what true justice even is in a case like this. Is it about, revenge, an eye for an eye?
Yeah.
Or is it something more?
Man, that question, it's been debated forever. Philosophers, legal experts, everyone. And there's no simple answer. But I think it's important to just try and understand the different points of view. Even within the same family, people can have totally different ideas about what justice looks like.
Right. And we can't forget, this isn't just some abstract legal debate, right? These are real lives, real people who've been deeply, deeply affected by what happened.
And while the legal system, they're focused on Sigmon, on the punishment. It's the victims, their families, who are left to deal with the aftermath, the pain, the grief, the loss, those things that they don't just disappear.
It's a good reminder that the impact of these crimes, it goes way beyond the courtroom. And it brings us back to that question we've been talking about, that big question, right? Does the death penalty, no matter how it's done, really provide any real closure, any real justice?
Some families, I think they do find some peace, knowing that the person who caused them so much pain is, gone. But like we saw with Rebecca Armstrong, that's not always how it works. For some people, the death penalty, it might feel empty, like it doesn't solve anything,
Right.
Like it's just more violence.
Right.
And we got to respect those feelings, those different views. There's no one way to heal, no one way to find closure.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I gotta say, I'm left with more questions than answers. But maybe that's the whole point, right? To really grapple with the complexity, to think about what we believe, and to try and make sense of these really tough choices.
Yeah, I think that's it. This case, it's forced us to confront some hard truths about the death penalty. Its history, how it's done, the way it affects everyone involved.
It shows that there's just no easy solution when you're talking about life and death, about justice and mercy. And as we go from here, it's important to keep having these conversations, to really think about what we believe, and to work towards a system that's fair and just and humane.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And thanks for joining us on this journey. Hopefully it's given you something to think about, and maybe you'll keep exploring these issues on your own.
Thanks for diving deep with us.